For 3 other instances, see the Scientific American 47-194, 52-83, 68-325. As to wedge shape larger than could very well be called an axe, Nature 30-300, that May 27, 1884, at Tysnes, Norway, a meteorite had fallen, that the turf was torn up at the spot where the object had been supposed to have fallen, that 2 days later a very peculiar stone was found nearby. The description is, in shape and size, very like the 4th part of a large Stilton cheese. It is our acceptance that many objects and different substances have been brought down by atmospheric disturbance from what, only as a matter of convenience now, and until we have more data, we call the Super Sargasso Sea. However, our chief interest is in objects that have been shaped by means similar to human handicraft. Description of the Thunderstones of Burma, Proceedings of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, 1869-183, said to be of a kind of stone unlike any other found in Burma, called thunderbolts by the natives. I think there's a good deal of meaning in such expressions as unlike any other found in Burma, but that if they had said anything more definite, there would have been unpleasant consequences to writer in the 19th century. More about the Thunderstones of Burma in the Proceedings of the Society of Antiquity of London, 2-3-97. One of them, described as an adze, was exhibited by Captain Duff, who wrote that there was no stone like it in its neighborhood. Of course, it may not be very convincing to say that because a stone is unlike neighboring stones, it had foreign origin. Also, we fear it is a kind of plagiarism. We got it from the geologists who demonstrate by this reasoning the foreign origin of erratics. We fear we're a little gross and scientific at times. But it's my acceptance that a great deal of scientific literature must be read between the lines. It's not everyone who has the lamentableness of Sir John Evans. Just as a great deal of Voltaire's meaning was interlinear, we suspect that a Captain Duff merely hints rather than to risk having a Professor Lawrence Smith fly at him and call him a half-insane man. Whatever Captain Duff's meanings may have been, and whether he smiled like a Voltaire when he wrote it, Captain Duff writes of the extremely soft nature of the stone, rendering it equally useless as an offensive or defensive weapon. Story by a correspondent in Nature 34-53 of a Malay of considerable social standing. And one thing about our data is that, damned though they be, they do so often bring us into awful good company. Who knew of a tree that had been struck about a month before by something in a thunderstorm? He searched among the roots of this tree and found a thunderstone. Not said whether he jumped or leaped to the conclusion that it had fallen, process likely to be more leisurely in tropical countries. Also, I'm afraid his way of reasoning was not very original. Just so were fragments of the Bath Furnace meteorite, accepted by orthodoxy, discovered. We shall now have an unusual experience. We shall read of some reports of extraordinary circumstances that were investigated by a man of science. Not, of course, that they were really investigated by him, but that his phenomena occupied a position approximating higher to real investigation than to utter neglect. Over and over we read of extraordinary occurrences. No discussion, not even a comment afterward findable, mere mention occasionally. Burial and damnation. The extraordinary and how it quickly is hidden away. Burial and damnation, or the obscurity of the conspicuous. We did read of a man who, in the matter of snails, did travel some distance to assure himself of something that he had suspected in advance. And we remember Professor Hitchcock, who had only to smite Amherst with the wand of his botanical knowledge, and lo, 2 fungi sprang up before night. And we did read of Dr. Gray and his thousands of fishes from 1 pailful of water, but these instances stand out. More frequently, there was no investigation. We now have a good many reported occurrences that were investigated. Of things said to have fallen from the sky, we make, in the usual scientific way, two divisions: miscellaneous objects and substances, and symmetric objects attributable to beings like human beings, subdividing into wedges, spheres, and disks. Journal of the Royal Meteorological Society, 14-207. That, July 2nd, 1866. A correspondent to a London newspaper wrote that something had fallen from the sky during a thunderstorm of June 30th, 1866, at Netting Hill. Mr. G.T. Simons of Simons Meteorological Magazine investigated, about as fairly, and with about as unprejudiced a mind as anything has ever been investigated. He says that the object was nothing but a lump of coal, that next door to the home of the correspondent, coal had been unloaded the day before. With the uncanny wisdom of the stranger upon unfamiliar ground that we have noted before, Mr. Simons saw that the coal reported to have fallen from the sky and the coal unloaded more prosaically the day before were identical. Persons in the neighborhood, unable to make this simple identification, had brought from the correspondent pieces of the object reported to have fallen from the sky. As to credulity, I know of no limits for it, but when it comes to paying out money for credulity, no standards to judge by, of course, just the same. The trouble with efficiency is that it will merge away into excess. With what seems to me to be superabundance of convincingness, Mr. Simons then lugs another character into his little comedy. That it was all a hoax by a chemist's pupil, who had filled a capsule with an explosive and, during the storm, had thrown the burning mass into the gutter, so making an artificial thunderbolt. Or even Shakespeare, with all his inartistry. Did not lug in King Lear to make Hamlet complete? Whether I'm lugging in something that has no special meaning, myself or not, I find that this storm of June 30th, 1866 was peculiar. It is described in the London Times, July 2nd, 1866, that during the storm the sky in many places remained partially clear while hail and rain were falling. That may have more meaning when we take up the possible extra-mundane origin of some hailstones, especially if they fall from a cloudless sky. Mere suggestion, not worth much, that there may have been falls of extra-mundane substances in London, June 30th, 1866. Clinkers, said to have fallen during a storm at Kilburn, July 5th, 1877. According to the Kilburn Times, July 7, 1877, quoted by Mr. Simons, a street had been literally strewn during the storm with a mass of clinkers estimated at about 2 bushels, sizes from that of a walnut to that of a man's hand. Pieces of the clinkers can be seen at the Kilburn Times office. If these clinkers or cinders were refuse from one of the super-mercantile constructions from which coke and coal and ashes occasionally fall to this earth, or rather to the Super-Sargasso Sea, from which dislodgement by tempests occurs, it is intermediatistic to accept that they must merge away somewhere with local phenomena of the scene of precipitation. If a red-hot stove should drop from a cloud onto Broadway, someone would find that at about the time of the occurrence, a moving van had passed, and that the moving man had tired of the stove, or something, that it had not been really red-hot, but had been rouged instead of blacked, by some absent-minded housekeeper. Compared with some of the scientific explanations that we have encountered, there's considerable restraint, I think, in that one. Mr. Simons learned that in the same street, he emphasizes that it was a short street, there was a fire engine station. It had such an impression of him hustling and bustling around at Notting Hill, searching cellars until he found one with newly arrived coal in it, ringing doorbells, exciting a whole neighborhood, calling up to second-story windows, stopping people in the streets, hotter and hotter on the trail of a wretched impostor of a chemist's pupil. After his efficiency at Notting Hill, we'd expect to hear that he went to the station and something like this. It is said that clinkers fell in your street at about 10 minutes past 4 o'clock, afternoon of July 5th. Will you look over your records and tell me where your engine was at about 10 minutes past 4, July 5th? Mr. Simon says, I think that most probably they had been raked out of the steam fire engine.